Welcome to Restoria. I'm Arthur, and this is your quiet place for gentle bedtime stories. Get comfortable, take a breath, and let the story slow your thoughts and ease you softly into sleep. The Hammam in the Old Quarter. The Old Quarter kept its own hours, and by the time Layla turned off the main street, the shops had drawn their shutters and the day had handed itself over to the lamplighters. She went down the narrow lane between the leaning houses, past the fountain where two cats sat washing, past the shut door of the spice merchant that breathed cumin and dried rose into the cooling evening. At the end of the lane, the wall of the Hammam rose up grey and low and older than anything around it, and above its door a single lamp burned in an iron bracket, and under the lamp the door stood open onto a heat that reached out to meet her before she had crossed the step. She had walked here since she was a child, and she had always called the lane by the wrong name. Değirmen, she said, as she had heard it before she could read, when it was in fact something grander that nobody in the quarter ever used. No one had corrected her. There had been no reason to. The door gave onto the Kaymakan, the tall entrance hall, and she stepped into it out of the blue evening and let the heat close over her like water closing over a hand. The hall rose 2 floors to a wooden dome, and around its walls ran a gallery of cubicles with worn cushions where bathers dressed and rested. In the middle of the floor, a marble fountain stood and did the thing it had done for 400 years, which was to let water fall from its lip into its basin, drop after drop after drop, a sound so even and so old that the whole quarter seemed built around it. That was the sound she came for. Before the heat, before the marble, before any of it. The fall of water into the fountain, echoing up into the dome and down again, patient and unhurried, the pulse the building kept hour on hour. An old woman sat by the fountain on a low stool, and she was the natir, the attendant, and she had been the attendant here longer than Layla had been alive. She looked up and knew the face and did not make a fuss of it. She rose and took down from a shelf a folded peshtamal, the thin checked cloth of the bath, and a pair of wooden clogs worn smooth on top by 100 years of feet. "The hot room is empty tonight," the old woman said, setting them in Layla's hands. "You will have the marble to yourself. Take your time. There is no one waiting." Layla went up into one of the cubicles and drew the curtain and undressed in the amber lamplight of the hall coming through the gap. She folded her clothes as she went, more carefully than she did at home, the fold itself a kind of setting down. The day came off with the clothes, the walk through the streets, the errand that had brought her across the city, the tally of things undone that a person carries without noticing until the moment they put it down. The smallhest. The clogs made their sound on the marble when she came down, a hollow wooden knock, tack, tack, that rose into the dome and came back changed. Every hammam had that sound, and no two had it alike. It was the sound of the building measuring your steps and giving them back to you a little grander than you had made them. She crossed the Kaymakan to the low arched door on the far side, and beyond it lay the Sogukluk, the cool room, a chamber of grey marble and dim lamps that stood between the world outside and the heat within, so that no bather passed from cold to hot without a threshold in between. She sat in the cool room a while, as you were meant to, and let the first of the heat find her. It came up through the marble bench and into the backs of her legs. It hung in the air, not heavy yet, only a promise of the room beyond. The lamps burned low in their niches. Through the next arch, muffled and inviting, came the deeper sounds of the hot room, water poured from a bowl and falling on stone, the drip of the domes, the long echo that told the ear the space in there was round and high and full of steam. She was in no hurry to go through. The whole evening lay open, and the pleasure of a hammam is partly the pleasure of doing each thing in its turn, one at a time, with nothing skipped. The cool room first, then the heat, then the marble, then the washing, then the coming back out by degrees, cooler and cooler, until you sit at the end wrapped and drowsy by the fountain with a glass of tea. To rush any part of it was to miss the point, and she had not come all this way on this evening she had kept for herself, to miss the point. The heat gathered in the little room. She felt it take her shoulders first, the place she carried the day, and begin the patient work of loosening what the day had knotted. Her breathing changed without her asking it to. It went lower and evened out, and fell into time with the fountain in the hall behind her, drop and breath, drop and breath. She sat with her hands loose in her lap, and her back against the marble, and let the cool room do what the cool room was for, which was to let a person arrive before the heat asked anything more of them. When she was ready, she rose and passed through the last arch into the Narrated, the hot room, and the heat there met her whole. It came around her at once, dense and wet and welcoming, and it carried the smell of hot stone and old soap and the faint mineral breath of the water. The room was round beneath a great dome, and the dome was pierced all over with small holes glazed with thick glass, the filgozu, the elephant's eyes, and through each one the last of the evening let down a bead of coloured light. They lay scattered across the steam like stars seen through breath, amber and a dim rose, and here and there a blue, drifting as the steam drifted, never quite still. In the center of the floor, raised a little above it, lay the Göbek Tashi, the belly stone, a great disk of marble heated from beneath by the fires that heated the whole building. It had been polished by centuries of bathers until it held the glow along its edges like water. She crossed to it, her clogs knocking on the wet floor, and set them aside, and climbed up onto the marble, and it was hot against her palms, and hotter yet against the soles of her feet. She lowered herself down onto it and lay back, and the heat took her along the whole length of her spine, and she let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a year. There is a moment on the belly stone that a person waits a whole year for without knowing they are waiting. The stone is too hot at the first touch, almost more than the body will take, and then the body gives into it, and the too much becomes exactly enough, and the heat stops being something the skin resists and becomes something it drinks. That moment came to her now. The marble held her. Above her, the pierced dome hung its scattered beads of light in the rising steam, and she lay under them and looked up and did not think of a single thing she had walked in carrying. The heat went into her by degrees, into the muscles of her back, into her shoulders, into the backs of her knees where the marble met them, into her open hands. It reached places the day had clenched and asked them, without hurry, to let go. They let go. She could feel her pulse in her wrists where they lay against the stone, unhurried now, eased to the pace of the fountain in the far hall, and the steam rose off her skin and joined the steam of the room, so that after a while she could not have said where she ended and the hot air of the dome began. Gently, water moved somewhere at the edge of the room. Along the round wall ran a series of marble basins, the kurner, each with 2 brass taps, one for hot and one for cold, and each dripping in its own time into its own hollow. The drips did not keep together. They fell across one another, a scatter of bright notes under the broad hush of the steam, and the round room took each one and stretched it into an echo and let it fade before the next. She lay and listened to them the way you listen to rain on a roof when you have nowhere you need to be, which is to say not really listening, only letting the sound arrive and leave and arrive again. Time did an odd thing on the belly stone. It loosened as the muscles loosened. It stopped being a line she was moving along and became a heated pool she was lying in, with no near edge and no far one. She might have lain there 10 minutes or the better part of an hour. The eyes of glass in the dome had shifted their colors as the sky beyond the glass went from blue to the deeper blue that comes before dark, and the amber ones had grown richer for it, and the blue ones had gone the color of ink. She watched them without watching them. The steam turned through the colored light and carried the color with it as it turned. Her skin had begun to open to the heat, the pores loosening, the sweat rising clean and steady and running off her at the temples and along her arms. This was the work the hot room did before any hand touched you. It softened the whole surface of a person, drew the weak up out of the deep places and to the top where it could be washed away. She turned her cheek against the marble. It was hot and smooth and faintly wet under her face, and it smelled of stone and of every clean thing that stone had ever been washed with, and she lay with her eyes half closed and let the dome and its drifting stars blur to a soft field of color overhead. The old woman looked in once through the arch, saw the shape of her on the marble, saw that all was as it should be, and withdrew without a word. There was a great courtesy in that, in the not speaking, in the leaving of a person to the first long stretch on the stone. The washing would come, the case, the foam, the poured water, but not yet, and the not yet was itself a gift, and Layla received it lying full length on 400 years of heated marble, with the steam turning its colored light above her and the fountain keeping its old count in the hall. All of this heat came from somewhere, and the somewhere was below. Under the marble floor of the hot room ran a hollow space, and under that lay the furnace, the kulhan, where a fire had been kept burning since the middle of the afternoon. A man tended it whose whole work was the fire, feeding it, banking it, reading its heat by old habit, and Layla had never once seen him, for the tender of the furnace and the bathers above never meet. He worked in the dark below with the flames, so that she could lie in the glow above on the heated stone. She thought of him sometimes, lying there, the unseen man in the heat beneath the heat, keeping the fire so that the marble under her cheek stayed hot. This was the work the hot rose from the furnace through the hollow floor and into the great disk of the belly stone and into the marble of the basins and the benches and up the walls, so that the whole room was heated not from a hearth in its midst, but from every surface at once, evenly, from below, the way the earth itself holds heat after a day of sun. There was no fire to see. There were no flames in the hot room at all, only the stone giving out what the hidden fire had put into it patiently for hour upon hour. It was an old way of warming, older than the city above the quarter, carried down from the baths of a vanished empire, and it had never been bettered for the making of a room a body could lie in and let go. She pressed her palm flat to the marble beside her and felt the heat come up into it, steady and deep and without any flicker, and she thought of all the hands that had pressed the same stone in the same place across the centuries and felt the same even heat rise to meet them. The stone did not know one hand from another. This gave its heat to whoever lay on it, the rich and the poor, the old and the young, the grieving and the glad, without preference and without end. There was a great kindness in a thing that warmed everyone alike. She let her hand rest where it lay, and the heat came up into it, and the fire she would never see burned on quietly in the dark below to keep it coming. This was the work the hot room did before any hand touched you. It made the whole surface of a person, drew the weak up out of the deep places and took it wand de camp steady and deep. When the old woman came again, she came to work, and she came without hurry. She had changed into a dark peshtamal of her own, and she carried a copper bowl and a rough mitt of woven goat hair, the kese, and a flat cake of green olive soap. She set them at the edge of the belly stone and touched Layla once on the shoulder, a signal older than any language, and Layla shifted onto her front and folded her arms beneath her cheek and gave herself over. The first thing was water. The old woman filled the copper bowl at the nearest basin and poured it in one smooth fall down the length of Layla's back, and it was hot, and it ran off her sides onto the marble and away down the worn channels in the floor. Then the kese. The old woman drew the coarse mitt down her back in one firm stroke, and up again and down, working the heat-loosened skin, and the touch was strong and sure and asked nothing of Layla but to lie there and be tended. There is a particular surrender in being washed by another person once you are grown. Most of a life is spent doing for yourself. To be scrubbed, unhurried by hands that have done it 10,000 times is to be returned for a little while to the smallness of being cared for, and the body remembers that smallness even when the mind has quite forgotten it. Most of a life is spent doing for yourself. To be scrubbed, unhurried by hands that have done it 10,000 times is to be returned for a little while to the smallness of being cared for, and the body remembers that smallness even when the mind has quite forgotten it. The most of a life is spent doing for yourself. To be scrubbed, unhurried by hands that have done it beyond the usual. The body stifling, and everywhere it passed it left the skin new. Now and then she poured another bowl of hot water to rinse away what the kese had lifted. The water fell and ran and found the channels and left, and the drips of the wall basins went on scattering their bright notes into the steam, and the fountain in the hall counted on, and the whole round room was a machine for the pouring and falling and echoing of water, endlessly, gently, 400 years without once stopping. Layla lay with her cheek on her folded arms and watched a single drop of water travel the marble a hand's breadth from her face, gathering others to itself as it went, until it was heavy enough to slide away toward the channel and be gone. After the kese came the foam, and the foam was the thing children remembered all their lives. The old woman took a cloth bag, dipped it, filled it with air and olive soap, and swept it above Layla's back, and out of it came a cloud of lather, warm and weightless, settling over her like the first fall of snow settling on a field. It kept coming. It heaped up soft and white along her spine and over her shoulders until she lay under a whole drift of it, and the smell of the green soap rose around her, clean and faintly bitter, the smell of olives and of every washing day of her life laid one on another. Under the foam, the hands began again, circling now, unhurried, and she closed her eyes and let them. There was no part of this that asked her to be anywhere but exactly here. Nothing to answer, nothing to decide. The hands moved over her through the foam, and the water came and went, and the steam turned its colored beads of light overhead, and time went on being a pool with no edges. She thought of nothing in words. The thoughts that came were closer to sensations, the heat of the marble beneath the foam, the strong kind pressure of the hands, the smell of soap and stone, the drip and echo and drip, and one by one even those loosened their outlines and drifted off into the general heat, and she let them go and did not call them back. The rinse, when it came, was a ceremony of its own. The old woman filled the copper bowl and poured again, hot sheet after hot sheet of water running the foam off her and away, and each fall of it was a fresh, clean shock that the body met and then welcomed. The last of the soap ran off pale into the channels. Then a hand on her shoulder once more, the old signal, and Layla turned onto her back and lay looking up at the pierced dome while the woman worked along her arms and her hands, pressing each finger in turn, unhurried, thorough, as though there were nothing in the world that evening but this one pair of hands to be seen to. When it was done, the old woman poured a last bowl over her, from the shoulders down, and set the copper aside, and touched her once on the crown of the head, which was the sign that the washing was finished and the rest of the evening was her own. "Lie as long as you like," she said. "The stone will keep its heat. I will bring tea to the hall when you come out." And she gathered her bowl and her mitt and her soap and padded away across the wet marble on her bare old feet, and the arch took her, and Layla was alone in the round room under the dome with the drifting color and the falling water and the heat rising off her clean skin. The heat and the water carried her back, as they always did in the end, to her grandmother. It was her grandmother who had first brought her here, to this same room, up the same lane she had always called by the wrong name when she was a child of 6 or 7, and the dome had seemed as high as the sky. She could see her still, a broad, unhurried woman who moved through the hot room as though she owned it, greeting the other women by name, settling onto the belly stone with a groan of pure contentment, calling the young Layla to come and lie beside her on the heated marble. Say had been half afraid of the place then. The heat, the echo, the strangeness of so much bare stone and falling water, as the voices of the women broke apart and came back from the dome as though the building were speaking. But her grandmother had lain beside her and taken her small hand in her large one and told her to listen to the water, only the water, and to let the rest be. And she had listened, and the fear had gone out of her into the marble and never fully come back, so that for the whole of her life afterward, a dripping fountain in a stone room had meant her grandmother's hand around hers and the words, "Let the rest be." They had come once a week through all the winters of her childhood. It had been the ordinary thing then, the neighborhood Hammam, the center of a street's whole life, the place where news passed and matches were made and babies were bathed and the old were washed with the same care as the young. Her grandmother had known every stone of it. She would point up at the pierced dome and name the colors of the light and tell Layla that when she herself was a girl, the same lights had fallen on her grandmother and on hers before that, back and back, so that the beads of color drifting in the steam were the same beads that had drifted over 100 years of women in that room and would drift over 100 more. Say there had been a jar. This was the detail that came to her now, lying on the stone, the particular thing that no one else would have kept. Her grandmother had owned a little tin of rosewater ointment that she rubbed into her hands at the end of every bath, and the tin had a dented lid that never sat straight, and she had thumbed it open the same crooked way 1,000 times, and the smell of that rosewater on warm, clean hands was, to Layla, the smell of being loved and looked after. The tin was gone. Where such things go, it had gone. But the smell of it lived on somewhere behind her face, and the heat had found it tonight and brought it up whole. The tin was gone. Where such things gone, it had gone. But the smell of it lived on somewhere behind her face, and the heat had found it tonight and brought it up whole. She did not chase the memory or try to hold it. She had learned over the years that these returns came of their own accord in the heat and left the same way, and that the trying to keep them only broke them. So she let her grandmother be there for a while, broad and unhurried on the marble beside her, and then she let her go, the way you let go of a hand when it is time to sleep and the hand is glad to be let go. The grief that used to come with the memory had worn away to something else across the years. Not an ache now, only a warmth, close kin to the heat of the stone, that she carried out of the room each time and could not have named if asked. The women of those winters were mostly gone now. The street had changed as streets do. The hammam kept fewer hours and drew fewer bathers, and on an evening such as this one, she might have the whole hot room to herself, where once there would have been 20 voices breaking apart against the dome. And yet the water still fell. The old woman sat on by the fountain with her folded cloths. The fires beneath the belly stone were lit each afternoon by someone whose whole work it was, and the marble still gave up its heat at evening, and the beads of colored light still drifted, and a person could come up the lane out of the tired day and lay the day down here and be tended and be new. That was the thing she had come to understand, lying on the stone through so many years of evenings. The hammam did not need to be busy to do its work. It only needed to go on being what it was, a round room full of heat and falling water, keeping its old count, holding its colored light, ready for whoever climbed the lane in need of it. It had held her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother, and it held her now, and the holding did not lessen for being spread across so many. There was enough of it. There had always been enough of it. It fell like the water, endlessly, and ask nothing in return. The heat draws things up out of a person, and not only the dust of the day. It had drawn up her grandmother and the crooked tin of rosewater and the winters of her childhood, and it drew such things up out of everyone who lay long enough on the stone. That was half of what a hammam was for, though no one said so. You came to be washed, and you were washed, and while the hands worked and the water fell, your whole life rose gently to the surface of you and was looked at once and let go. The women of the old winters had known it. They had lain on this marble and let their own dead rise around them in the steam, mothers and sisters and children, and had wept a little sometimes, unashamed, and been the easier for it, and gone home clean in more ways than one. Layla lay under the drifting color and felt herself the newest link in something very old. Not a chain exactly, more a current. The same heated water passed hand to hand down the generations, each woman dipping into it and rising and giving her place in time to the next. She had no daughter to bring here, and that was a small, quiet ache she had made her peace with years ago. But it did not trouble her tonight. The room did not need her to pass it on. It would go on being itself and warming whoever came long after she had stopped climbing the lane, and there was rest in that thought rather than sorrow. The light in the dome was changing. She had watched it change 100 times, and it never failed to hold her. As the sky beyond the thick glass gave up the last of its blue, the beads of color overhead lost their fire one by one. The amber went to bronze, and the bronze to a dim cold glow, and the blue eyes of glass went dark first of all, until the dome above the steam was only a scatter of faint embers where an hour before it had been a field of drifting stars. It was not a loss. It was the room doing at dusk what it had always done, letting the outer light go and taking up instead the low, steady glow of the lamps that burned in the wall niches, so that the hot room turned as the evening turned, from a place of daylight to a place of flame. That was half of what a hammam was for, though no one from a place of daylight to a place of flame. She rose from the belly stone at last, unhurried, her whole body loose and heavy with heat, and the leaving of the marble was its own plain pleasure, the cooler air of the room meeting her wet skin as she stood. Her clogs knocked on the floor, tack, tack, and the dome gave the sound back to her, a little softened now, as though it too was settling toward the end of the day. She crossed to one of the marble basins along the wall, a kerner worn to a hollow by the countless bowls dipped in it, and this was the part she kept for herself after the tending was done. To sit alone at the basin and pour the water over herself by her own hand, bowl after bowl, in no order and to no purpose but the falling of it. She dipped the copper and raised it and tipped it over the back of her neck, and the water ran down her spine and over the stone seat and away, and she dipped it and poured again, over one shoulder, over the other, over her arms, unhurried, watching the water find its paths and take them. There was nothing to it. That was the whole of its worth. A grown woman pouring warm water over herself in a stone room, thinking nothing, needing nothing, while the lamps burned in their niches and the fountain counted in the hall. The heat had reached all through her now. It was in the bone. Her hands, when she looked at them, were pink and clean and softened, the lines of them eased, and she turned them over in the lamplight and thought, without words, of her grandmother's hands and the crooked tin of rosewater, and then that too drifted off with the steam. The water fell from the copper bowl. It struck the stone and broke and ran. The basin filled, and she emptied it, and it filled again, patient as the tap that fed it, and the sound of her own idle pouring joined the drip of the other basins and the fall of the far fountain until it was one more voice in the old chorus of the room. Somewhere beyond the walls, the old quarter was going about its evening, the shutters down, the lamps lit, the last of the day's bread being eaten in the leaning houses along the lane she had always miscalled. Cats on the fountain in the little square. The spice merchant's door shut on its cumin and rose. And in the middle of all of it, older than all of it, this round room held its heat and its water and its one bather, and let the city be the city outside, while inside there was only the pouring of the bowl and the glow of the lamps and the steam going up dim and unhurried toward the darkened eyes of the dome. She poured until she had no wish to pour any more, and then she set the copper bowl down in the hollow of the basin and sat a while with her hands in her lap and the last of the water drying on her skin. The room breathed its heat around her. The lamps held their low flames. She was as clean as the water and the stone and the old kind hands could make her. Outside, and it seemed somewhere further in than that, and the day she had walked in wearing had gone entirely down the marble channels with the soap and the foam, and she could not have called it back now if she had tried. Leaving a hammam is not done all at once. You come out of the heat the way you went into it, by stages, so that the body is never asked to cross too much at a time. She rose from the basin and took up a dry peshtamal from the pile by the arch and wound it around herself, and the dry cloth on her clean skin was a pleasure of its own. And she stepped out of the hot room into the cool room and let the first drop in the heat meet her there. The Soukluk held its grey marble and its low lamps. She sat on the bench a while and felt the fierce heat of the inner room begin to loosen its hold, the sweat easing, her breath coming back toward its ordinary depth, the flush going out of her by degrees. Through the arch behind her, the drip and echo of the hot room went on without her. Through the arch ahead, the fountain of the Kamakan fell into its basin, drop after drop after drop, the sound that had met her at the door and would see her out of it. Between the two she sat in the grey chamber and cooled, and it was one of the finest feelings a body knows, the slow release after deep heat, the muscles gone to water, the mind gone to a wide and pleasant blank. She stayed until the cool room had done its work and the hard heat had left her, and she felt at last ready for the outer hall and the tea and the soft descent of the evening's end. She rinsed her feet at the little channel by the arch before she stepped up out of the cool room, an old habit taught to her as a child and never once broken since. The cold water ran over her ankles and away, and she stood a moment on the threshold between the grey chamber and the amber hall, wrapped in the dry cloth, her hair damp and combed back with her fingers, cleaner and lighter than she had felt in a month of ordinary days. Behind her, the two rooms of heat and stone held their steam and their falling water. Ahead of her, the fountain fell in the tall hall, and the lamps burned, and a glass of tea was waiting, and there was nowhere in all the city she would rather have crossed into than that. Through the arch ahead, the Kamakan received her back into its amber lamplight. The great wooden dome rose overhead, and the fountain fell in the middle of the floor, and the old woman had been as good as her word. On the worn cushions of one of the raised cubicles, a tray had been set, a slim glass of tea the color of a garnet on a little saucer, 2 cubes of sugar beside it, and a folded dry cloth to lean against. Layla climbed up into the cubicle and settled herself among the cushions with her back to the wall and the fountain before her, and drew a second dry cloth over her shoulders and took up the hot glass by its rim as you learn as a child, so as not to burn your fingers. She sat with the glass warming her palms and let her gaze travel the hall she had known all her life. The worn marble underfoot, the tall doors of the cubicles, each with its faded curtain, the iron brackets of the lamps, black with the smoke of 100 years. Nothing in it had changed since she was a child, and nothing in it would change when she was old, and there was a great comfort in a place that simply went on being itself while the years ran past its door. She was in no hurry to dress and go. This was the last room of the ritual, and not the least of it, the sitting wrapped and drowsy by the fountain, while the heat let go of you by inches, and the tea warmed you from within, and the day, already gone, receded further still. Other bathers on other evenings had sat where she sat, wrapped as she was wrapped, drinking the same garnet tea from the same slim glasses. Her grandmother had sat here. She could feel it, not as grief and not quite as memory, but as a kind of company, the sense of a place so long and so gently used that no one who sat in it was ever entirely alone. The glass emptied by little sips, the steam of it thinned and stopped. She set it down on the little saucer and leaned her head back against the folded cloth and let her gaze go up into the shadowed height of the wooden dome where the lamplight lost itself among the old beams. The fountain fell, drop after drop, into its marble basin. Her hands lay open in her lap, pink and clean and eased, and the deep heat of the inner room was in them still, giving itself back by degrees to the cooler air of the hall, the last of the belly stone leaving her by way of her own quiet palms. Her old woman went about the hall in her unhurried way, and Layla watched her without watching, through half-closed eyes. She folded the used cloths and stacked them. She trimmed a lamp that had begun to smoke. She dipped a cloth in the fountain and wiped the rim of the basin, a small tending she must have done 10,000 evenings, and the water she wrung from the cloth fell back into the basin and joined the falling of the fountain. There was no wasted motion in her. She moved as the building moved, patiently, at the pace of water, and it came to Layla that the old woman and the Hammam had grown so close together that it was hard to say where the one left off and the other began. The lamps threw their amber lamplight up the tall walls and lost it in the dome. The cushions held the shapes of all the bathers who had rested on them. The marble of the floor, worn into paths by 4 centuries of bare and clogged feet, shone dully where the lamplight caught the damp. Layla drew the dry cloth closer at her shoulders. The heat was leaving her by degrees, and in its place came the pleasant heaviness that follows heat, the limbs grown weighty, the head content to rest against the wall, the whole body asking nothing further of the evening than to be allowed to sit exactly as it sat. She thought idly of the walk home and found she was in no hurry for it. The lane, the little square with its fountain and its cats, the main street where the lamplighters had done their work. It would all keep. The night outside had cooled and would be kind to walk through, clean and blue after the heat of the room, and she would go out into it, clean herself, and carry the heat of the marble in her bones halfway across the quarter before it faded. But not yet, for now there was the cushion and the fountain and the amber hall and the last of the tea's heat in her belly, and the old woman moving softly among the lamps, and no reason on earth to stand. Above the wooden dome, though she could not see it, the sky over the old quarter had gone fully to night. The first stars would be out over the rooftops now, over the leaning houses and the shut shops and the domes of the Hammam itself, those low stone domes with their eyes of thick glass gone dark. From the street, the building would show almost nothing of what it held, only the one lamp burning in its iron bracket over the door, and the faint sound of falling water reaching whoever passed in the lane. A person walking by, tired from their own day, might hear it and slow their step and think of coming in. There was room. There was always room. The city went on beyond the quarter, wide and lit and murmuring, its bridges and its water and its million windows. But the Hammam did not belong to that city so much as to an older and slower one that lay beneath it, the city of small lanes and neighborhood fountains and rooms where the same thing had been done the same way for more years than anyone could remember. From the same statement, here the news was the fall of water. Here the hour was told by the fading of color in a dome. Here a tired woman could climb a lane she had climbed since childhood and be washed clean and sit wrapped by a fountain until the day was wholly gone, and that was all, and that was everything. Her work in the hall done, the old woman lowered herself onto her stool by the fountain and sat, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes half shut, resting in the manner of someone who has kept a place so long that sitting in it is itself a kind of tending. She did not speak, and Layla did not, and the not speaking lay easy between them, two women at the end of a day in a room built for exactly this. The fountain fell between them. The lamps burned. Now and then a drop from the hot room beyond reached them faint through the arch, and the pigeon shifted in the dome, and otherwise the hall held its old amber hush and asked for nothing. The heaviness in Layla's limbs had deepened past the pleasant and toward the irresistible. Her head rested against the folded cloth at the wall. The empty tea glass stood on its saucer where she had set it, a last bead of garnet drying in the bottom. The dry pestomale lay soft over her shoulders, and beneath it her skin was cooling by degrees from the deep heat of the stone, giving that heat back to the air of the hall, a breath at a time. She let her eyes close and opened them, and let them close again in the unhurried way of a person with nowhere to be and nothing left undone, and each time they closed they were slower to open than before. There was nothing left of the day in her. The kese had taken it, and the foam, and the poured water, and the marble channels had carried it away, and the tea had settled the clean place it left behind. Whatever she had walked in carrying was gone down the drains with the soap. From remained was only the room, and the fountain, and the heat ebbing kindly out of her, and the old woman drowsing on her stool, and the amber lamplight on the tall dim walls, and the deep animal contentment of a body washed and heated and at rest with nothing whatever required of it. She thought she would sit a little longer before she rose to dress. There was time. There was all the time in the world. The night outside would keep cool and blue and patient, and the lane would keep, and the walk home, and everything beyond the one lamp over the door. For now, there was only this: the fountain falling into its 400-year basin, the lamps holding their small flames, the heat of the marble going out of her by less and less into the amber air of the hall. The hall grew stiller as the evening wore on. The drips from the hot room came further apart as the poured water on the marble in there finished its patient finding of the channels, and the stone gave up the last of what had been spilled on it. The pigeon in the dome had tucked its head and gone to roost. Even the old woman's breathing had lengthened and evened where she sat on her stool, her chin dipping now and then toward her chest and lifting again. Only the fountain kept on as it had, drop after drop after drop, tireless, patient, the one sound in the building that never came apart or faltered, the count the whole place was built to keep. Layla let herself sink into the cushions by degrees. Her shoulders came down. Her hands lay open and heavy in her lap, pink and clean, the heat of the stone almost gone from them now, only the faintest of it left in the very centers of her palms. The dry cloth held what heat remained close about her. She was as far from the day as the room could take her, which was very far indeed, past thinking, past remembering, down in the wordless place where the body knows it is safe and warm and clean, and lets the mind put itself away. The lamplight moved on the walls. The fountain fell. She watched a single drop gather at the lip of the fountain across the hall. It swelled and held, and caught a bead of amber lamplight in its curve, and hung there a moment longer than seemed possible. Then it let go and fell, and struck the basin, and was gone into the water with all the drops that had fallen before it. Another gathered behind it at the lip. It would swell and hold and fall in its turn, and another behind that, on and on through the night and into the morning, and through all the mornings to come, and she did not have to watch it to know it was so. She let her eyes close. The room held her. The cushions took her weight. The dry cloth lay soft at her shoulders. The heat went on, leaving her palms so faintly now that she could not have marked the moment it left. There was no moment. There was only less, and then a little less than that. The fountain fell, drop, and then, after its own patient count, drop again. The lamps burned low in their brackets. The amber lamplight lay quiet on the marble floor. The old quarter slept beyond the walls, and the city slept beyond the quarter, and the water fell in the middle of it all, tireless, keeping the count it had always kept. She did not think of the lane now. She did not think of the walk, or the night, or the morning. Those would keep. The heat was in her bones, and the clean was in her skin, and the fountain was in her ears, and there was nothing beyond the round, warm hush of the hall that asked for her at all. Her breathing had lengthened and evened. It rose and fell and rose in its own slow time. It had fallen into step with the water somewhere back in the evening, and it stayed there now, drop and breath, drop and breath, the two of them keeping a single count between them in the amber hall. The old woman drowsed on her stool. The pigeons slept in the dome. The dry cloths lay folded on their shelf. The last of the tea dried in the glass, and on the worn cushions by the fountain a woman sat with her head against the wall and her clean hands open in her lap, gone heavy, gone still. A drop gathered at the lip of the fountain. It swelled, it held. It caught the amber of a low lamp in the curve of it and hung there, bright and round and whole. Then it fell. It struck the water and was taken in. The basin held it. The hall was warm. The lamps burned low, and the fountain gathered the next drop to its lip, and swelled and held, and let it fall into the old settled water, on, patient and unhurried, through the last hour of the evening and into the deep of the night.